Okay, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 20849 in the name of Jamie Halker-Johnson on sustainability of remote, rural and island communities. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. Calling Jamie Halker-Johnson, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I remind members of my register of interest as a partner in a farming business, and can I also thank all those who signed today's motion, which has allowed me to bring forward this debate to the Chamber. With an election on the horizon, there will be inevitably more partisan tone in the air after today's proceedings, but I would like to recognise how often members representing remote, rural and island communities have been able to work together to get things done, and I especially appreciate the work of all those who have joined me on the cross-party group on islands that I established this session. There is scope for the CPG to do more and reach out more even further, but I do hope MSPs and the many other organisations and individuals involved have seen the value in having a forum for island issues at the heart of the Parliament. I spoke yesterday in the Crossing Stage 3 debate about the loss of experience and expertise from this Parliament, and this debate will be the last contribution that a number of members from the rural communities will make. My party colleague Oliver Mundell is stepping down after 10 years representing the Dumfriesshire constituency. A scion of the great Mundell political dynasty, I first worked with Ollie's father, David, when I was a relative newbie to politics and this Parliament was further up the road. Like David, Ollie has dutifully served those he represents, always standing up for their interests, regardless of how popular it made him with our Conservative whips. I know colleagues from across the Chamber will miss his consideration and commitment on those issues he was most passionate about. It will also be Beatrice Wishett's last speech, and can I particularly thank her for all of her efforts with the CPG on islands and making it the success it's been, and for the strong voice that she has been for Shetland. Our island communities face many challenges, and it's vital those are heard in this chamber and in the corridors of power, and she has very much played her part in doing that, and I wish her all the very, very best for the future. John Mason will also be bowing out after today's debate, and I think it would be hard-pressed to describe him as a strong voice for our island communities, given his previous confusion over what actually constitutes an island. But I have served with John on the committee, most recently the Finance Committee, and I know how diligent he has been in conducting the vital scrutiny role required of MSPs. And last but not least, it will be the Cabinet Secretary's last speech too, and I know that because she reminded me of that fact last week. We haven't always agreed, and the rest of my speech will probably highlight some of those areas of disagreement. But Mary Gougeon has always been one of the more approachable members of a government that isn't always known for truly welcoming differing opinions. And I know that I and my colleagues would recognise that if needed, the Cabinet Secretary would sit down with those with concerns and hear them out, and that was appreciated. We would certainly wish her all the very best in whatever she chooses to do after this place. And now, with all the niceties out of the way, my motion directly mentions the Highlands and Islands, but I know that most of the issues we will talk about today touch constituencies and regions around Scotland that face the challenges of remoteness and rurality. Some listeners may see these as little more than a list of grievances, the complaints of people who have chosen to live north of the Central Belt. Some may see them simply as a variation of problems felt elsewhere, no better or no worse in the end. That is not the feeling on the ground in rural Scotland. Last year, the Scottish Government's research into the effect of increases in the cost of living concluded, and I quote, that rural and remote places in Scotland are more exposed to high inflation, noting high costs of fuel, food and transport. That is not in itself unusual. We know businesses often operate on reduced margins, salaries are lower, costs are often higher. What is different now is a palpable feeling that many communities are on the edge of a precipice. Instead of creating sustainable communities, it feels more like the core resilience of many of our villages and towns have been slowly crushed, and this has practical consequences. Whether it's the young family facing another year of being unable to afford a permanent home for their children, or the small business owner who seems to be sacrificing more than she gains but keeps going, the working person trying to make ends meet, or the older person on a fixed income who's afraid to turn on the heating. Specific rural issues are pushing more and more people into these sorts of categories, and the result can be everything from depopulation to despair. When the motion was written, I referred to the many unprecedented challenges that remote, rural and island communities have faced. But we can now add a crippling energy crisis on top of that. And it's a crisis that won't just hit households, it hits businesses and public services. It comes at a time when household finances are already stretched, when many businesses have already had their confidence battered, and we were already worried about additional costs through rates revaluations and tax changes from April. And for the public sector, it comes against a backdrop of overstretched and under-resourced services. The traditional rural economy is struggling by almost every measure. Farm incomes have fallen, harvests have been decimated by the climate, and increases in regulation has driven up costs and complexity. Many rural communities are also dependent on visitors, whether the Highlands and Islands, the south of Scotland, or places like Stirlingshire and Perthshire. There too, costs for operators in the visitor economy are escalating. Well, the government sees this as a good time to impose more regulation and more tax. In addition to economic woes, small rural communities are increasingly seeing services moved further away. Their local police officers disappeared, the local GP combined with elsewhere. The local hospital has seen services downgraded or lost entirely. Perhaps even the local school is at risk. The goal of efficiency savings, often without any consideration of second-order effects, are motivated not by the efficient management of resources, but at driving costs down. There is a very visible retreat of public services from communities, and that has a cost in the terms of towns and villages being hollowed out. But it's also impacting the quality of service people are seeing. It's more difficult than ever for many people to see their GP, or finding an NHS dentist is a struggle in most of the country. Crimes are going unreported because there is no expectation of their being investigated. The problems of remoteness are made all the greater by failures in connectivity. Our roads are in the worst state in my memory. Major infrastructure projects like the dualling of the A9, the A96 and tackling the repeated closure of the Reston-Be Thankful have been delayed or overlooked. The costs are not solely economic, but sometimes measured in lives lost. Meanwhile, the ferries crisis continues, with this SNP government coming face to face with the consequences of 2 decades of neglect, while islands and ferry-dependent communities pay the price. If the next Scottish Government is to serve the people of remote, rural and island Scotland, there desperately needs to be a reassessment of the relative cost of delivering public services in remote and rural areas. That these services are not currently being effectively delivered is clear. And in many cases, like delivering social care at home, there is no strategy at all. We also need to see real effort to grow the economies of Scotland's regions and an economic strategy from the Scottish Government that analyses its regional impact and recognises how island and remote communities operate. We will not always agree on the way forward, but there are many areas where we can work together and where the need for change is both urgent and evident. As we go into this election, I hope that the needs of remote, rural and island Scotland will be at the top of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. Before moving to the open debate, just to advise the Chamber, we are heavily oversubscribed for this debate. I'm conscious of afternoon business starting at 3 o'clock. There will need to be time for the Chamber to be prepared for that. So, therefore, I'm going to have to keep members to their speaking time allocations, and I will be cutting them off if they go beyond that 4 minutes. Call first Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as this will be my last speech of session 6, I thank you and the Presiding Officer team for your patience and the fair and courteous manner in which you presided over proceedings of this Parliament. And as Convener of Finance and Public Administration, I'd also like to record my thanks to the committee's members and clerking team. The committee has won multiple awards and built a formidable reputation, but none of that would be possible without the hard work and dedication of its clerks and collegiate working by colleagues. I also note that this is the Cabinet Secretary's last response to debate, and I find it sad that Mary is leaving Parliament at such a young age after a mere decade in this place. 8 in government, 5 in Cabinet. I'd like to wish her all the best for her future endeavours after she catches the Midnight Express. Presiding Officer, I congratulate Jamie Halker-Johnson on securing this debate. Scotland's islands are truly remarkable places. Our island communities are consistently identified as being among our happiest communities and the best in which to grow old or raise children. As MSP for Arran and Cumbria, I know firsthand the outsized contribution both places make to our economy, culture and natural heritage. I wanted to speak today about the many positive developments taking place in Arran and Cumbria. For example, Millport's £48 million flood protection scheme, which has improved flood protection for more than 650 homes and businesses. or the £9.17 million investment going into Arran's bus services, the reopening and refurbishment of Millport Town Hall, which received a £1.934 million regeneration grant from the Scottish Government, or the 18 affordable homes delivered as part of the Rowerdene affordable housing project. Instead, I will focus on the issue that influences every aspect of island life, the ferries. Both communities I represent are beyond exasperation with the current situation, and CalMac for that matter. In Cumbria, the community has been fighting a rearguard action against CalMac's attempts to impose both scheduled maintenance windows and increased turnaround times. The new summer timetable is a significant reduction in sailings, impacting both islanders and visitors on busy, sunny summer days. There is deep concern about the lack of transparency around the evidence used to justify these changes, such as undisclosed turnaround time report and limited explanation for withdrawing simultaneous loading and unloading despite decades of safe operation. As one Millport resident put it to me, and I quote, "It seems to me that CalMac has forgotten that they are meant to provide a service, not service a business plan." In Arran, the situation for islanders has become intolerable. According to the Isle of Arran Ferry Committee, the last day Arran had a timetabled service without risk being advised was the 14th of February. There have been constant cancellations since. Arran Acts have endured a level of disruption that few other communities in Scotland faced, given issues with the MV Glensannox and the seemingly constant breakdowns of the MV Caledonian Isles, even after £11 million worth of repairs. The consequences are profound. Constituents describe 40 visitors sleeping overnight in Brodick Hall, cancer patients forced into exhausting and costly detours via Clunig, families stranded for days on the mainland, empty shop shelves as freight struggles to get through, and elderly residents missing vital hospital treatments because they simply cannot rely on the ferry. The deterioration of confidence in the route is real, and the emotional, financial and social toll in Arran is immense. Islanders are not asking for miracles, just a reliable, functioning lifeline service. Presiding Officer, I visited Ardrossan Harbour on Monday to hear about the essential redevelopment project to begin next year, as well as some of the immediate actions CMAL are taking to improve resilience. The Scottish Government's acquisition of Ardrossan Harbour should be a landmark moment. Now it's in public ownership. There is a clear path towards the harbour's much-needed redevelopment. When coupled with the new tonnage being added to CalMac's fleet, this should represent a turning point in West Coast ferry services. However, while the significant investment is welcome, that alone is not enough. Islanders have been clear that the tripartite structure of CalMac, CMAL and Transport Scotland needs reform to streamline decision-making and improve accountability. That will now be for the next Parliament to deliver. Islanders will rightly expect urgency, accountability and a ferry system worthy of the communities that exist to serve.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I now call Oliver Mundell to be followed by Carol Mocker. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I start on some final thoughts, I want to make clear up front that the comments are not personally aimed at the Cabinet Secretary, who, like everybody across the chamber, I respect and enjoy working with. And unlike her predecessor, I've never felt the need to compare her to a chlorinated chicken. Instead, Marie Goujon deserves recognition, not least for her decision to pull the plug on the Galloway National Park, a rare example of Scottish Government ministers listening to the views of rural Scotland. I also know how seriously and to her credit she takes the health and well-being of all Scotland's rural workers. Presiding Officer, in leaving, I'm saddened not at the thought of going, but in the knowledge that the Parliament I'm leaving behind is not a true friend to rural Scotland. I share the frustrations of my constituents that Holyrood is dominated by urban central belt thinking and has an obsession with telling people living in rural Scotland how to live. When the Scottish Government are not busy banning things, they are busy imposing them. Our precious uplands are being carpeted in trees and turbines, often displacing people and changing the character of our communities forever. Speaking personally, alongside supporting the many community events and projects that make the Dumfriesshire constituency so special, perhaps my proudest moments of elected office have been standing alongside communities in the David versus Goliath battles to see off the worst of these attempts to industrialise our countryside. There is far from a level playing field, and it often feels like money talks, with our hillsides being sold to the highest bidder without any thought for the social consequences or how future generations will put food on the table. Meanwhile, here in our national parliament, tokenism too often prevails over substance. Whether it's flying the EU flag outside long after we've left the EU, serving oat milk, still labelled as oat milk, despite the courts clarifying that this is unlawful, or the banning of greyhound racing long after the last track in Scotland has already been shut. By doing these things, we are doing a disservice. We are going out of our way to diminish the great democratic prize others have fought for. Indeed, so much of the debate in this chamber seems a far cry from the genuine excitement I witnessed as a child watching Donald Dewar first address this chamber in 1999. Most institutions, as they age, grow in stature, but in the case of Holyrood, we seem to be stuck in reverse. This fuels the growing disconnect between the Scottish Parliament and many of the people it's supposed to represent. Decent, hard-working people who get their hands dirty and pay their taxes like anyone else. My sincere hope is that future sessions will be different, that other members are more successful than those, including me, in shifting the dial. Rather than attacking rural Scotland, we should be celebrating it, we should be backing it, and we must be willing to recognise that in a country like ours, delivering rural services costs more. Rural Scotland, not least Dumfriesshire, holds real potential, and the answers to many of our most pressing challenges can be found in our rural communities. Our rural and remote communities just need to be given the freedom to flourish. Our communities need politicians who listen to those on the ground who really do know best. Endless legislation and policy is not a substitute for substance or real-world experience. Politicians, however green they claim to be, must understand their limitations and remember those who elected them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. Now call Carol Mockin to be followed by Tim Eagle. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a South Scotland MSP, I am no stranger to the harsh realities faced by those accessing services in rural areas. I speak to constituents right across the region, and the issues discussed match that found in the Government's own research: transport, travel costs, access to GPs and other services, along with depopulation and lack of economic opportunity. The pressing issues we are discussing today are unique and diverse, and any action taken to address them must be flexible and responsive. My colleague, as you know, Rhoda Grant, would normally speak in the rural debates, but I know, if I can just say, that she has really appreciated the support from yourself, Mary Goujon, and from Jim Fairley, and the work in the committee with yourself as well. So I pass on from the Labour Group our very best wishes. Because I think that we all agree living in a remote and rural community should not limit your access to basic and specialist care, nor should it limit your opportunities. What we do know is that the housing crisis is acute. Depopulation and demographic changes are very real in rural communities. Transport and connectivity is raised with every MSP in this chamber. Access to services can be limited. Economic instability affects rural communities often in a very heightened way, and the cost of living, we know, is just much more exposed to those living in those rural communities. The next Parliament, as everybody has said, must work together to rebuild trust with rural communities and businesses. It must redouble efforts to co-design with communities a rural strategy and really put a rural and island future in a more secure footing. And the next government must work with these communities and make sure that the legislation is implemented and monitored to really ensure that delivery. Now, much of my 5 years in this place has been focused on health, and I feel it would be remiss of me not to raise it again in this context of rural and remote. This session of Parliament ends as it begins, with a government that has really let patients and staff within our rural and island health services down. We repeatedly hear of a healthcare system that under-delivers and underperforms for our rural communities. Our universal healthcare system has become a bit of a postcode lottery, and the rural health inequalities are, they continue to be exacerbated by decisions that are made that don't always work for our rural communities. General practitioners are difficult to get in rural areas, waiting times increase, delayed discharges are high. Rural areas bear the brunt of the failures around matching up services. Distances can be difficult, and I think, if I can say, it really links the need for transport, economy, the cost of living, that crossed portfolio working, I think, really needs to happen in the next Parliament. In my region, there's difficult stories, as you know, around maternity services, alcohol services, but in particular I want to raise training and supporting of staff to stay in rural areas, because I do think that is cross-portfolio. We must work with trade unions, professional bodies, training providers, the NH boards to get really flexible training opportunities, deliveries and recruitment. Apprenticeships is a particular area that I've mentioned, and I hope we can do more work in the next Parliament, and really hope that you can pass on as a legacy that rural does require that cross-portfolio working, and I hope to see it in the next Parliament. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call Tim Eagles to be followed by Ariane Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And before I start, can I just thank Oliver Mundell? Been a great colleague, and I thought a really good, actually, talk there on rural Scotland and what it means. Can I also just thank Marie Goujon and the work I've done with her over the last year. Frustratingly difficult to enrage Marie Goujon, which is always annoying when you're on committee. But it has been a good working relationship, I think. And whilst we don't agree on things, it is sad to see you go. And finally, just a quick message about John Mason. For those of us of a Christian faith in this Parliament, you have led by example, and your prayer breakfasts will not be forgotten. The pastries are always welcome on a Thursday morning. The importance of rural Scotland to me is incredible. I've spent my entire working life in rural Scotland. I have been on thousands of farms across the North East and the Highlands of Islands. I have been on many estates. I have working with different communities. It is a passion of mine that I wanted to bring into this chamber when I came just over 2 years ago. And when I came in, I went to the Chief Whip at the time of my party and I said, I want to do something on rural Scotland. And so I have been lucky enough to get 3 members' debates in the last 2 years. The first on health and social care, because I recognised very early on and from my days in the council that was an incredibly important area. And I still think to this day that it's not right that basic services are not delivered in rural communities throughout Scotland. It's fair enough for complex surgery that people may have to travel, but for basic services, we should be delivering that as local to home as we possibly can. The second one was on rural depopulation crisis. It's one thing to have a plan to try and deal with rural depopulation, but it's another thing to deliver that plan. And as Oliver Mundell said, rurality costs more to deliver, but what would rural Scotland be what would Scotland be if we didn't deliver for rural Scotland? And my final one was on rural bridges, the importance of connecting communities. I now have 4 bridges in Murray that are falling down, and it's not right that we are disconnecting communities in this way. And I hope that in the next Parliament, if I return, I will continue the pressure to bring back the capital funding that is required for rural bridges. Can I thank the communities across the Highlands and Islands, though, that are doing so much to keep the rural Scotland going, making businesses work, helping each other and working to attract the professionals that we need across rural Scotland. But also, I recognise the challenges and the increasing rural penalties that I feel I see. The exemption that I tried to put forward on the visitor levy for travel on health grounds, I think that's a rural penalty that didn't get through. That, as I've said, the patients have to travel for routine care, that's a rural penalty. That ferries don't work, that's a rural penalty. That bridges don't get fixed, that the A9 and the A96 aren't dualled, that councils don't receive the funding they need, that rural buses, our services, are stopping, that parcel delivery is more expensive. All of these things and many more are rural penalties that as yet we have failed to deal with and that we need to deal with moving forward. But as a message to the young people, because I think that's incredibly important, the young people of rural Scotland, I know many of them will want to travel, to explore the world and to see the lights of the big cities as they get older. But I ask that they know this: there will always be a home for them in rural Scotland. And that's why we need to ensure that housing and jobs, employment, travel and opportunities are the very best they can be, so that we can ensure they feel safe in returning to rural Scotland at some point in their lives. It's one thing to have a rural depopulation plan, as I said, but it's another thing to live and breathe it. I would, and we should, and I hope the new Parliament does recognise that rurality will cost and does cost more. But as I've said, without it, Scotland would be a very different place. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I call Ariane Burgess to be followed by Beatrice Wishart. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank Jamie Halker-Johnson for bringing this rural debate to the Chamber. But before I do that, I'd like to pay tribute to several members who won't be coming back in May. It's been a pleasure to work with Marie Goujon on several key pieces of legislation during this session. I'd like to thank her for being so constructive and personable during our discussions, and I wish her all the best for the future. I'd also like to give my thanks to Oliver Mundell and John Mason for their years of public service within the Parliament and for the people that they represent. And Beatrice Wishart, I already name-checked her yesterday for her championing of Shetland and, in particular, our shared interest in fixed links. The motion today raises several key points I agree with. The lack of availability of affordable accommodation is a real concern, and I share the view that we need to boost connectivity across the region. As the motion notes, these are key to strong communities and must be handled with nuance by the Scottish Government. Where I disagree is in its diagnosis for the challenges facing rural and island communities. Increased regulation of the visitor economy is something that will help fix housing shortages and support local authorities to deliver the very services the motion states are downgraded. The reason why services are on their knees can be traced back to 14 years of Tory austerity in Westminster and historic underinvestment in rural Scotland long before this Parliament existed. Throughout this session, the Scottish Greens have delivered for people across the Highlands and Islands on transport. We've scrapped peak fares for rail passengers, as well as islanders on the North Link ferries, introduced a £2 bus cap and across the Highlands and Islands, and secured a consultation on cruise ship levies that will help to reduce pressure on port towns and island communities. On housing, we've ramped up availability and affordability by winning multi-year funding for community housing projects, getting more money into the Rural and Island Housing Fund, and implementing tougher council tax rules for second homes. Tenants are better off thanks to green wins from the Housing Bill, including long-term rent controls, stronger protections against no-fault evictions, and we were there for renters in the aftermath of COVID, bringing in a rent freeze and a ban on arbitrary evictions, both of which were key promises in our 2021 manifesto. I've also been supporting the agricultural sector, securing funding for a sustainable farm and food skills pipeline that will support the transition to regenerative growing practices and give more young people opportunities in this crucial sector. I'd urge the Government to follow through on that work. On top of this, I've supported market gardeners working to set up a support scheme that would ensure crofters and other small-scale producers are funded based on what they deliver rather than the size of their holdings. I'm incredibly proud of what the Scottish Greens have delivered so far, but I'm also aware that more still needs to be done. I'm deeply concerned about the cost of living impact Donald Trump's reckless attack on Iran will have. Energy costs look set to soar, which will hit people across the Highlands and Islands who are already face the price premium. The cost of fuel is also likely to rise, which will affect everyone, from fishers to community pharmacies delivering vital prescriptions. The Scottish Greens will continue to be there for folks in the ongoing crisis. Looking further ahead, we want to instigate proper investment in the future. Highlands and Islands communities must see the delivery of a rural housing revolution, more affordable homes, more social housing and more long-term empty properties coming back into the community. We want to ensure that every community has access to essential banking, childcare and public transport, including free bus travel, which is already enjoyed by half of Scotland's population, and we want to tackle escalating land prices to democratise land. Scotland's rural communities are the backbone of our nation, and the Scottish Greens will do all that we can to give them the best possible future.
Thank you. I now call Beatrice Wishart to be followed by Brian Whittle. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Jamie Halcrow-Johnson for bringing this important debate to the Chamber on this, the last day of the 6th session of the Scottish Parliament. This will be my last speech in Parliament. Appropriately, it's on the sustainability of Scotland's remote, rural and island communities. It's been an honour and a privilege to serve in the Parliament, and I thank colleagues across the Chamber for their kind words, for their friendship, and I wish Oliver Mundell, John Mason and the Cabinet Secretary well as they step down. During my time here, I've spoken repeatedly about the issues that affect the island and rural areas of Scotland, and I've often said that islanders don't look for special treatment, but what people do seek is the means by which to live and work in their communities and to survive and thrive in them. That entails investment in infrastructure and public services. Digital connectivity, despite government promises, is still not 100% available across island and rural areas, yet it's vital for sustainability in today's world. It costs more to deliver services the further away from the central belt you get, and almost everything you need when you live on an island has to be brought in by ferry. A lack of housing for young local families and the cost of travel are reasons I hear from people who have left Shetland to live elsewhere. And I've heard numerous accounts of people coming to Shetland to take up jobs in the NHS or council, only to leave a few months later because they can't find permanent accommodation. This will also be the last time I get to reinforce Shetland's call for a network of subsea tunnels to link islands, which would be another turn in the evolution of Shetland's transport connectivity. And I'm pleased to have been able to work with MP Alistair Carmichael and the Tunnel Action Groups to make progress on this much-needed infrastructure development. Of course, I didn't plan to come here, Presiding Officer, so I thank former MSP Tavish Scott for stepping down halfway through Session 5, throwing us into a whirlwind of a by-election in 2019, and I thank too very much the people of Shetland who put me here. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Willie, Alex, Jamie and yourself, Liam, for their support, and I hope there will be more women on the Scottish Liberal Democrat benches after the election. None of us could do the work we do without the teams behind us, and I'm very grateful for my team of Will, Helen, Kevin, Joy and Theo, and past staff Lily, Erin and Louise, who have worked hard and supported me over the last 7 years. And I'd also like to thank all the staff in the Scottish Parliament building who do so much to enable us to do the work that we do. Presiding Officer, I live in a wonderful community. It has its problems like any other place, including drugs, alcohol and domestic abuse, but it is also a generous one, as was demonstrated just last weekend. A funding plea was put out for a well-known local man to access treatment not available in Scotland for a brain tumour. Within 3 days, the fund had raised over £100,000 to help with ongoing treatment in Germany. For a population of 23,000, that is quite remarkable. And when tragedy struck my family 18 months ago, when my dear son-in-law died suddenly, my daughter Louise and their children, Kieran, Leighton and Eve, my grandchildren, and the wider family felt the arms of the community wrap around us with love and support, and for that we will forever be grateful. I also appreciated the support from my colleagues across the Chamber, including the Presiding Officer and the First Minister during that difficult time. So I leave now to return to my family and friends who have supported me throughout my time here, and look forward to a bright Shetland summer. And if I have any pearls of wisdom for the next intake of MSPs, it's to do what we all came here to do, to make life better for our fellow citizens, and to do so by working constructively together across the Chamber and with kindness.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by Emma Roddick. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and it's a pleasure to follow Beatrice Wishart, who, as we all know, has been a real champion for her communities in the time that she's been in here. I also wish to pay tribute to my friend and colleague Oliver Mundell, who has shown us what a constituency MSP should be, to John Mason, who I've had the pleasure of working with on community. It's always been interesting working with you, John. I'll leave it there. And to Marie Goujon, who's frustratingly always happy and upbeat, no matter what the situation. And although we disagree in some things, I know that she and I share a passion for the local produced food, and we have worked really hard together on that, and I really appreciate her support in that. To Jamie Halker-Johnson, I thank him for bringing this this debate to the Parliament. I wanted to maybe introduce a slightly different way to approach this subject. I wanted to, as always, I wanted to speak on this really from the way in which we started to develop health policy, and we started from the position of what health or what services should be available to our communities across the country, no matter where they come from, whether that be urban, rural, or indeed the islands. We should all have access to GPs, we should all have access to dentistry, pharmacy, A&E, maternity. These are things that should be statutory across our country, no matter what. And the same can be said for education and for community activity. But how we deliver that uniformity of service will vary from urban to rural, to our islands. And I think there's an acceptance, especially in our rural and island community, that in some services there will be that requirement to travel. That might be to trauma or to specialist health services. One of the things I've tried to bring to this chamber is the revolutionary. Healthcare will be revolutionised, I believe, by the adoption of technology, and no more will that benefit more in our rural communities across Scotland, disproportionately so, I feel. So we need to look at how we are, because we are way behind the rest of the world in terms of adopting that kind of technology that will deliver services in a more effective way across our country. It was mentioned about connectivity. Connectivity is the lifelines to all of our communities, and we all know. I mean, I'm East Kilbride. I live in East Kilbride, and I know how poor the roads are. I know how infrequently the buses are. I know how infrequently the rail services are, and how difficult it is to get out of your car. But for rural and island communities, it is a lifeline. And as Jeremy Halford-Johnson has said, you know, the roads, the rail networks, the ferries, and we keep coming back to the ferries, are absolutely key to keeping those communities where they are and stopping that migration away from there. So if I was I'm going to end this. If this as you'll be as the chamber will welcome, will be my last speech in this eventually is my last speech in this session. But if we're going to deliver for all of our communities, including our islands and rural, it will require something that this Parliament, I think, has been very poor at. It's cross-portfolio working to deliver that basic need we have across all of our communities. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. Before calling the next speaker, in order to protect the time available for each member who wants to participate, I'm minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes. I'd ask Mr Halford-Johnson to move the motion.
Moved.
Okay, the question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Emma Roddick to be followed by Finlay Carson. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I do want to start by thanking Jamie Halford-Johnson for allowing us to debate the many issues that I and he have fought most hard on over this session on its final day. I have been really lucky with my regional colleagues, Rhoda, Edward, Ariane and Tim in particular. Whether bumping into each other on surgery tours or working together on committees, they have been a frequent and usually positive influence in my working life. Jamie and I, while interacting less often, have also never clashed out with this chamber, and I think that's the kind of collegiate working that we should be promoting across parties. In my first speech in this place, I spoke about the mental health crisis in our region. When I made that speech, only 137 days had passed since my mother died of COVID. 44 months had passed since I was homeless. That was now 1,758 days ago, and I have learned so much since, from the finer points of goose management to the difficulties in delivering island housing developments, but my outlook on the core issues that we face has not changed, nor has my passion for addressing them. That day, I told Parliament that I would spend the next 5 years doing everything in my power to improve the lives of others who make the Highlands and Islands their home. That I would work with colleagues across the chamber to make sure that we're getting it right, and that I would use my lived experience to contribute to discussions because I deeply understand the issues being faced by my constituents. And that is what I did. To serve as the Minister with responsibility for addressing depopulation was so meaningful to me. I am so proud of the Addressing Depopulation Action Plan that I published then, and the scale of the work that went into it from communities that I worked with, many of which were rural or island. I worked with the Transport Secretary to ensure that young islanders benefit from our free bus travel scheme, now extended to inter-island ferries. From this week, my constituents are benefiting from a £2 fare cap for single bus journeys. And I'm delighted that the trains that I travel on here every week are due for an upgrade next year. And now that we have a set timescale for the Nairn bypass, I look forward to seeing spades in the ground on that very soon. I'll never forget amending what is now the Housing Act, allowing us to collect data that will allow future parliaments to make better decisions, better policy, better law. When I look back at all of that and look forward to the work that remains, I'm proud of what's been achieved, but I have a deep feeling of unfinished business. I, the SNP, this Parliament, has more to do to ensure the sustainability of rural and island areas and the whole of the Highlands and Islands region, ensuring that locals can access high-quality public services. On that day in June 2021, I also spoke about how no matter which direction I'm travelling for, I look out for the Keswick Bridge lights in the distance and know that I'm nearly home. Much as I'll miss the contributions of many colleagues who don't plan to return, including the Cabinet Secretary, Elena Whittam to my right, and Joe Fitzpatrick, whom I did well up listening to at FMQs earlier, and much as I value the work that we all do here, I'll be heading home on Friday morning and I can't wait to look ahead and see that bridge. I will spend the next 6 weeks there working hard to come back here and represent this incredible constituency, but I hope that anyone who does so takes these issues just as seriously, because I know that society is best and this Parliament is best when protected characteristics and geography do not limit your ambition. There's a lot of work to do to make sure that people in the Highlands and Islands, young people like me, homeless and struggling or disabled and fighting, are supported to be contributors, to be happy, healthy, productive individuals, maybe even leaders, maybe even MSPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. Can I call Finlay Carston to be followed by John Mason? Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And firstly, can I thank and pay tribute to my colleagues who won't be returning next year, particularly Oliver Mundell, who's spoken out so well for Dumfriesshire, John Mason, and my dear friend Beatrice Wishart, who I know I'll miss dearly. We need to reflect on the hard work she did with the cross-party group on brain tumours. It's been remarkable what she's achieved in such a short time. Can I also thank my friend and colleague Jamie Halcrow-Johnson for once again showing his passion for rural Scotland by bringing this to the Chamber. Rural Scotland has been asked to do more with less, and it's simply not sustainable. For almost a decade, I've stood in this chamber making the case for rural Scotland, campaigning for a moratorium on inappropriate wind farm developments, defending the local services that our cottage hospitals once provided, leading the call to dual A75, and working through the cost of living crisis to secure support for rural households and businesses. Our remote rural and island communities are central to Scotland's economy, culture and identity, yet too often they are treated as an afterthought. Nowhere shows that more starkly than Galloway and West Dumfries, a region shaped by long distances, dispersed populations and fragile infrastructure. But distance must not mean disadvantage. It should not mean that a hospital appointment becomes an all-day journey, that expectant mothers face an 80-mile trip to the nearest maternity unit, or that access to justice, education and essential services depend on how far someone can drive. Yet that is exactly the reality for too many. Centralisation continues to hollow out rural life when a bank closes, when step-down beds vanish, or when services are removed to distant hubs. It's not just an inconvenience, it costs jobs, weakens high streets and leaves communities feeling forgotten. Connectivity, physical and digital, remains one of the defining challenges. And I've led the campaign to dual A75 because it's not just a regional road, it's a national economic artery, linking Scotland and England to Northern Ireland and carrying nearly £9 billion worth of freight every year. For too long it has been neglected, with safety concerns, unreliable journey times and chronic underinvestment holding the South West back. And the A77 faces similar issues. Warm words will not fix these routes, only investment will. And public transport cuts are another blow. When rural services disappear, communities are effectively cut off. Young people from education and opportunities, older residents from independence and workers from employment. And in 2026, it's indefensible that the flagship R100 programme has failed to so many areas of rural Scotland still have a lack of reliable digital connectivity. Without it, businesses cannot expand, people cannot work flexibly and communities cannot compete. Our rural economy is strong but under huge pressures, and I've stood with our farmers as they face rising costs, uncertainty and diminishing support. These are not just businesses, they are the backbone of our communities. Yet this week's rural support plan lets them down yet again, offering year-on-year reductions while asking them to deliver more. I have also raised the concerns of fishing communities who are navigating rising costs, complex regulation and deep uncertainty while trying to sustain an industry central to our heritage. And bizarrely, some of those efforts with regards to the scallop industry were actively and regrettably scuppered by Emma Harper, who had the chance to vote to make it more sustainable. But I want to put on record my thanks to Mary Goujon for her support in developing a new boat-based cockle fishery in my constituency. And I mean that from the cockles of my heart. It's an initiative that could bring tens of millions of pounds into the local economy. And indeed, I thank her for all the work she's done and for being a friend for 10 years. I remember Mary very, very dearly in the first few days of being a new parliamentarian. And I wish her all the best in the future. Presiding Officer, tourism is also a major issue in our region, while high streets such as the Stranraer, Dalbeattie and Newton Stewart are battling for survival. I realise I'm running out of time.
I think you've run out of time, but if you could just wind up, please.
Presiding Officer, what rural Scotland needs now is not more recognition of the problem, it needs action. We need policies that reflect rural realities, investment that matches rural needs, and a government that understands fairness means that it's ensuring no part of Scotland is left behind. Resilience must not be taken for the ability to endure endless pressure. If we're serious about building a fairer, stronger Scotland, then we must be serious about delivering for rural Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, John Mason, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Jamie Halker-Johnson for bringing this debate and other members for their kind words today. And I wanted to make the point that many of us in Scotland's urban areas and central belt do still deeply care for our remote, rural and island communities. I have visited a number of islands with Parliament committees over the last 15 years, including Islay, Arran, Mull, Harris, Lewis and Orkney, as well as going to Shetland for the by-election. And that's been one of the most enjoyable parts of being an MSP. But honestly, I normally visit islands as a tourist, and I have now been to, I believe, some 38. And I would just note that I consider the Uist and Benbecula to be one island, as I can drive my car between them without using a ferry. And I hold to the position, from one of my more controversial moments in Parliament, that Skye has in fact not been an island since it got its bridge, and I was proved correct during COVID when it was treated as part of the mainland. I can understand the desire to have causeways, bridges or tunnels linking islands to each other or to the mainland. Clearly that makes access much easier to a whole range of services, from shopping to medical services, weddings and funerals. However, I would just caution from a tourist perspective that such fixed links can make an island less attractive or magical for a visitor and could have a negative economic impact. Talking of driving my car, my priority for road improvements in Scotland would have to be the A82 between Tarbert and Ardluey, right at the top. We had the Road Haulage Association in Parliament last week, and the fact that two HGVs cannot even pass each other in stretches of that road is appalling. So in my opinion, that should be a higher priority than dualling the A9. I do not often agree with Scottish Land and Estates, but I do agree with some of the key points they made in their briefing for today. Tackling depopulation in rural areas has to be a top priority. And as they say, if rural Scotland does not thrive, Scotland does not thrive. Last summer I visited Mingulay for the first time and have previously visited St Kilda. And I find it incredibly sad that these islands, which once supported a hardy population, eventually had to be evacuated and now have no permanent human inhabitants. We do not want to see that happening to any more of our islands or remote areas. I noted press coverage just yesterday of the vacancy level for both primary and secondary teachers in the Highland Council area. Yet I get complaints from young teachers that they cannot get a job in Glasgow. Somehow we need to take this as a national challenge and support teachers and other workers from the urban areas to consider moving to more rural and remote parts. Another aspect of all this is political representation. The three main island groups, rightly, are guaranteed an MSP each. Yet the whole West Coast, from Cape Wrath to the Mull of Kintyre, forms only 3 constituencies and has 3 MSPs representing it. If the Western Isles can have an MSP for 22,000 registered voters, why should Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch have to have 63,000? We need to address that by not being so fixated with the population of constituencies. Land mass should be a factor too. This is clearly my last speech in Parliament, so I would just like to thank all those who make this Parliament work, including fellow MSPs, especially those who are leaving. We are much smaller than Westminster, and that is a big advantage in my opinion. We all know each other to some extent, and we have a building which is modern and fit for purpose, unlike the one on the Thames. We are not hampered by a second unelected chamber. One person can make a real difference in a chamber of 129, whereas having been at Westminster with 650 MPs, one person does not count for much, and Scotland counts for very little. I have tried over my 15 years here to say things that no one else would say and to ask questions that no one else would ask. And that has clearly got me into trouble at times, but it certainly has been a huge privilege to serve here. And finally, may I conclude by thanking yourself, Presiding Officer, and your two colleagues, and can I particularly thank you, and especially Alison Johnson, for taking a firm line when some members here have sought to bully you and undermine Parliament as a whole. Many of us are very grateful that you did that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mason. I should, though, point out, as the resident of Bury, I can assure you that the link South Isles and Orkney definitely are islands. With that, I call on Marie Goujon to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Firstly, just to say I'm really grateful to Jamie Halcrow-Johnson for securing this debate. I think given the breadth of areas that were covered in the motion, it could have been any one of my colleagues that was here to respond to it. But I'm delighted to have that opportunity because it's this SNP government that cares deeply about our rural and island communities, because when they thrive, all of Scotland thrives. Now, but firstly, there are a lot of items to cover today. I really just want to thank everyone across Chamber for the really kind words to me today. And I'm so glad that you expressed all that on a day when my mum is up here in the gallery to hear that, as opposed to, I think, half an hour's time when you'll be throwing pelters at me again in PQs. But I just want to recognise my mum, Marianne, who I wouldn't have entered politics without, the most inspirational woman I know, and who sacrificed so much for me, who really fostered that passion for debate, that drive for fairness and justice, and really stoked that fire to campaign for Scottish independence. So I'm really glad to thank her for that. And also just to sit here in my final speech, flanked by my closest friends and colleagues who I couldn't have survived these terms of Parliament without: Jenny Goldruth, Jim Fairley and also Nicola Sturgeon sitting behind me as well. But there's, as I say, there's so much that I want to cover and talk about today. But I also think it's important to recognise the last final contributions of some more colleagues. Oliver Mundell and I entered Parliament at the same time in 2016. I still remember our first meeting. He potentially does not. But in that term of Parliament, we were given opportunities to get to meet each other and really break down those political barriers. We served on the Justice Committee together initially, and even from that initial engagement to now, I've always enjoyed engaging with him. It's always been in good humour, normally outside of the chamber rather than inside it, as you've probably been able to judge from today, because inside the chamber we tend to profoundly disagree on a number of items. I also know that we've had that final contribution from John Mason. Now, despite representing a more urban constituency, I've always appreciated John's interest in the matters relating to my own portfolio that I know also matter greatly to him, none more so than I know than the sheep of St Kilda. But as species champion for the kestrel, it was honestly a sheer delight for me to respond to the debate that John Mason brought to Parliament just recently, because I think it's safe to say that the species champion debate is the only debate that actually unites us right across the chamber. But in all seriousness, John Mason has had many years as a councillor, MP, MSP. I think it's important to mark that contribution, and I want to wish him all the very best going forward. And then finally to Beatrice Wishart, who it's been an immense pleasure to get to know and work with during our time in Parliament. I've always appreciated her openness to engage with me, and through all of that, the numerous pieces of legislation that we've worked on together, she's always been driven by doing what's best for the people of Shetland. From fisheries to fixed links and a whole host of issues in between, we haven't always agreed, but I've always appreciated that ability to have those difficult discussions in a really constructive way with Beatrice, and I want to wish her all the very best as she steps down from Parliament. But I also just want to express those good wishes too for those not just who are stepping back, but who will hope to return in the next session of Parliament too. It's been a privilege to work with, such as yourself, Presiding Officer, Finlay Carson, Tim Eagle, Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, and a number of members across Chamber, not least Ariane Burgess, who we worked closely with, again, on a number of key pieces of legislation, always striven to do what is right. Now, being Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands has been the privilege of my life. I've worked alongside many others to deliver real and lasting change for our rural and island communities and businesses. Of course, some of those challenges remain, but our rural and island communities and industries are so rich with that opportunity, and this government has been determined to unlock it. Now, housing has been a key issue raised in the motion and through the debate today. Now, just this morning, we've had more information about the announcement that was made by the Housing Secretary, Mary McCallan, about the £10 million that's being made available from the 1st of April through the Scottish Emergency Heating Oil Scheme, providing that vital support to householders who are worried about the recent surges in the cost of heating oil and liquid petroleum gas. Now, this is a key example of where we have gone over and above what is provided by the UK Government to deliver for our communities. Now, this is alongside the wider investment that we're making in housing. Our Croft House grant scheme invested over £26.5 million, supporting more than 1,100 Croft homes. Now, we're going further still with an announcement this year of a new Rural and Islands housing grant scheme, investing up to £20 million. That's also alongside £37 million for a Rural and Islands housing fund and £25 million in rural affordable housing for key workers. Transport, of course, quite rightly has been mentioned in the debate today. Now, we have reduced the cost of travel, we have improved connectivity, we've expanded concessionary travel, abolished peak rail fares, introduced a £2 bus fare cap pilot in the Highlands and Islands, road equivalent tariff has reduced ferry fares significantly, and we can't forget the significant new investment in new ferries, which are going to improve those links, those lifeline links for our rural communities. And then finally, I want to reflect on two key areas that were touched on in the motion today that are the lifeblood of our rural, coastal and island communities and form the heart of my portfolio. And that's agriculture and fisheries. Now, we value our food producers in Scotland. That's why we invest more than £660 million every year in our farmers and crofters. And that's the most generous support package anywhere in the UK. We're continuing to back our marine economy, over £70 million through the Marine Fund Scotland since 2021, and £16 million announced just last week. But all of this pales in comparison to the funding that we should receive. The UK governments, both past and present, have shortchanged our farmers, crofters and fishermen. They've frozen funding, removed ring fencing, removed multi-annual funding and barnetised that funding across these critical areas, and that only serves to shortchange our critical food producers. Now, I'm proud of the work that we've done in supporting new entrants to our agricultural industry, the 17 new opportunities we provided on the Forestry and Land Scotland land, the Islands programme, the transformative projects they were investing in there, the investment in our community-led local development. Now, just recently we had the Tyne-and-Esk Local Action Group in Parliament talking about the return on investment that they see from that and the important work that they do in our rural communities. And I think one of the proudest parts of this job has been working with the youth local action groups and also with the Young Islanders Network, which I launched in Orkney a number of years ago. Working with our incredible youth leaders has just been inspirational, ensuring our young people have a voice and take part of our decision-making. Now, finally, Presiding Officer, as the member who has the honour of giving the final contribution of the final debate in this session of the Scottish Parliament, I just want to say what an absolute honour and privilege of my life it's been to serve the people of what I can now definitively say, without challenge, is the most scenic, culturally significant and generally just the best constituency in Scotland of Angus North and Mearns. Almost you'd cry for that, the beauty of it and the sweetness of the Scottish land and skies. Lewis Grassic Gibbon, the great author from the Mearns, summarising better than I ever could how I feel about my home region. From the coast to the glens, it really is the best of Scotland, and I want to really thank the people of Angus North and Mearns for putting their faith in me to represent them these past 2 terms in Parliament. It's also been the honour of, again, beyond imagining, to serve the people of Scotland as a member of the Scottish Government in what is the best portfolio in government. One of the great privileges in this role is who you get to meet and work with along the way, and the amazing people who quite literally keep you going in your job too. It's fair to say I've met some of the best of them, and I just want to touch on some of the people that have made a real impression on me. Firstly, my experience riding a combine with Andrew Moyer, discussing the techniques he's using on his farm and agricultural policy. Kenny Gibson and his constituency just in the summer last year. We visited David Carruth, whose woolly pigs we visited. Nothing quite warms your heart like driving along the road and having a troop of little piglets running towards you. There's organic dairy farmer in Elena Whittam's constituency, Bryce Cunningham of Mossgiel, who's working tirelessly to really improve our food system. And Martin Kennedy, whose farm I've been fortunate enough to visit a number of times, not just former president of the NFUS, but he's still working, still continuing to drive forward innovation in the industry that he's worked so tirelessly to represent. There's also our amazing fishermen. Now, just last week, I was launching the Marine Fund in Scotland. I met Sam Mason and Barry Brunton, fishermen who really care about the environment. They're innovating to avoid bycatch and who are just so passionate about what they do, which also brings me to Ian Whiteman, who I've met in Largs a couple of times. One thing I love about our farmers and fishermen, they're not backwards and coming forwards and telling you what they really think. But I also need to mention some of the incredible women that I've had the opportunity to work with and meet. Caroline Miller, true force of nature who's driven the incredible growth of agritourism in Scotland, Cora Cooper, a chance meeting on a bus at the Royal Highland Show leading to a farm visit, seeing firsthand how a commercial livestock business can work hand in hand with peatland and nature restoration, Nikki Yoxall and the incredible Denise Walton at the forefront of nature-friendly farming. From the incredible women in agriculture to the incredible women right here, I've been so fortunate to work with so many inspiring women. Firstly, in my time as a junior minister, to the formidable Jean Freeman and Rosanna Cunningham, but also my colleague and best friend Jenny Gilruth and Nicola Sturgeon, who took a chance on me by appointing me to Cabinet. Now, I want to put on record again just my sincere thanks to all of those who have supported me in my government role, the civil servants, the officials, the special advisers, Ian Muirhead, Kate Higgins, my incredible private office, my unfailing constituency office, again, who have pretty much been with me from the start, and I couldn't do this job without the Parliament staff who are so kind and who make working in this building such a joy. And last but certainly not least, my amazing family, who I can't wait to spend more time with, and my amazing husband, Baptiste. You need the patience of a saint to be married to anyone in this job, but he's looked after me and I would just be utterly lost without him. And on a final note, Presiding Officer, on this beautiful spring day, I really just want to end on a note of optimism, because even in spite of the challenges we face and the times that we're in, I'm full of hope and optimism for the future of our country. We have shown with the powers that we do have, we're delivering for communities across Scotland, focusing on the issues that matter, protecting funding and investment in our farmers and crofters, investing in our rural and island areas, taking action on land reform, but we could do so much more with the powers of independence. So while I'm stepping back from elected politics, I'll continue to work tirelessly for Scotland's independence and to deliver that fairer, more equal society we know it will bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting briefly, and I look forward to regathering with you, Cabinet Secretary, and a few other colleagues at 3 o'clock.